Today, more than ever, there's a lot of fertility diet advice on the internet, and it's really hard to know what you should listen to. It's also hard to know how to handle it because typically people going through treatment are very stressed. And now you have the added stress of all of these diets. So today we're going to talk about a new subject, intuitive eating, and how to understand it. What will help you in your fertility journey, what will help you in pregnancy, what you need to know and what you don't. So tune in. From our Building Your Family community, this is the Building Your Family podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Schumann, author, researcher, and reproductive medicine therapist. Welcome to a new episode of the Building Your Family podcast. So if you're like me, you see lots of confusing information on the internet about fertility and nutrition and fertility and lifestyle changes. And what's very confusing is that while we're seeing so many improvements in our understanding of nutrition, we're also seeing more and more people stressed about their infertility. And so I thought it would be really worthwhile to take a look at something that a lot of people, and I didn't really know about, which is called intuitive eating. And so I'm bringing on an expert. Her name is Sam Previte, and she's going to talk to us about intuitive eating. She's a registered dietitian and the founder of a group called Find Food Freedom. I'm so excited to have her on and help us with this difficult question. Thank you for coming, Sam.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And something I didn't mention when we chatted off air about my intro, but I'm also an IVF mom to two miracles. So fertility treatments and going through just the trying to conceive season has a big part of my heart. So happy to be here.
So you understand how difficult it can be.
Ooh, it is one of the hardest things I have ever been through, but it was worth every second, but definitely the most challenging thing I've ever been through.
So then you probably have experienced this feeling of pressure, right? There's all this pressure to do the right thing and to avoid the toxins and to make sure that you're eating healthy. But at the same time, you don't want to have pressure on you and you don't want to feel too stressed. It's like an impossible task.
Yes. I always like to remind people that if there was a magical diet that could get you pregnant, everybody would be eating it. And these difficulties of conception wouldn't exist. And so it's so important for people to hear there is no diet in the world that you can eat that is going to help you magically fall pregnant. Are there things that are correlated to some better outcomes? Potentially. And that is something we can look into. But I always like to remind people that the stress that we put around eating of, am I eating the right calories or macros or portions, or am I, sugar, or you name it, that stress is going to have way more negative outcomes on your treatments than the positives that could come from, which are very slim to none. So it's so important. As you know, it's such a stressful thing to go through fertility treatments. And so we do not need to be adding more stress with the food that we're eating.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. And not everyone can handle all of those demands, right? It's just so much for so many people. Some people naturally eat healthier foods and some people don't. And for people to make these huge lifestyle changes, it can be so much pressure.
I think it's also, food can be a coping mechanism a lot of times, which can be great because if we have the access to food, if food is accessible, food can serve a purpose. And so I think a big part of what we do with clients as they go through, whether it be fertility treatments and or just any stressful life events, AKA life, right? Life is stressful. We live in crazy times right now.
Yes.
Is helping our clients figure out what are some healthy coping mechanisms in addition to food. It's not about saying we can't turn to food to cope, because as soon as we restrict something or tell ourselves we shouldn't be doing something, it can cause this guilt and shame spiral, which then can actually cause the opposite behavior to happen than what we want. So a lot of times when we are working with clients, we're looking at, okay, if we are turning to food, like good old Ben and Jerry's ice cream when we are stressed, There's nothing wrong with that. It's not about saying don't do it, but it's understanding, okay, if it's not physical hunger that's making me turn to this, what's going on? What am I feeling? And what do I really need? And is there a way that I can build some healthy coping mechanisms in addition to food? And oftentimes we find when we start working with clients, food is one of their only coping mechanisms. So it's really fun to be able to build out those toolboxes and make them feel safe in their bodies.
Yes, I agree with you as a therapist,
Mhm.
100%,
Yes.
that it is
I'm speaking
so
your
important.
language right
Yes,
now, getting into
you are
your
absolutely,
wheelhouse.
yes, you are absolutely correct in that regard. But I think it's also hard to kind of think about, and let's talk about a few different issues. This idea that we are putting processed food in our bodies, and now we know a lot more about that, or we might have toxins in our environment. Maybe we're microwaving plastic or doing things that could potentially hurt our health. And now we can see plastics in molecular fluid. So we know that these things are starting to affect our bodies. So how do we look at that and at the same time say, okay, but I can't put too much pressure on myself?
I think the first thing I would tell any client, which I think you alluded to this a little bit already, is we do not need to overhaul our entire life overnight, in 1 week, in 1 month, right? And I think it's these little baby steps that we can do that are going to go a really, really long way. For us as registered dietitians, when we look at first with a client, how do we define the word health? How you might define health might be very different than how I define health, and everyone relates to that word differently. So when we're working with clients, we're looking at, okay, how do we improve your physical, mental, and emotional health? And we have different evidence-based assessments that we'll use that'll show different behaviors that our clients engage in, of how specifically dieting and disordered eating has impacted their life and their behaviors. And a lot of that for us is we're looking at first our relationship with food. Because I could, let's say, give somebody a sheet that says, don't microwave your food in plastic, or don't eat these 30 things, or, don't eat anything that has this on the label, or whatever it may be. And it could all be well intended. But if we feel guilt and shame related to our food choices or related to some of the things that we're doing in the kitchen and when we're eating, we could have the best meal plan in the world. We could have the best rules you could say in the world. It's not going to stick. And so a lot of what we do first is unpack that relationship with food and relationship with body. We do a lot with body image, which I find there's a huge parallel with the fertility community there, because there's so much shame and blame of my body is not doing what it's supposed to be doing, right? Falling
Hmm.
pregnant, or why can't I get pregnant? It's my body's fault. We hear that a lot. So, dietary patterns, hydration, sleep hygiene, stress management, which again, therapists here love that. So, there are so many things that we can do that are going to impact our health in a positive way. And all of those that we work on with our clients are uncoupled from changing the size of our body. And I really like to stress that, because we live in a world right now where there is a lot of emphasis on shrinking the body. In our practice, especially being eating disorder informed and thinking about disordered eating specifically, we're trying to work on with clients of how can we improve your health uncoupled from your body changing. Your body may inherently change size, but that's not the focus of what we do. So
Hmm.
when we're working with clients, even more specific example, when I say remove the guilt and shame with food, we have clients that have been told that they should not eat sugar for years on end. And what does that cause them to do? Binge on sugar. And what do they feel out of control around? Sugar. And what do? They don't buy sugar until they do. And then they eat sugar endlessly until they feel physically ill, which then makes them feel mentally and emotionally unpleasant and beat themselves up, guilt and shame spiral, so on and so forth. So, a big part of what we do with clients is exposure to these fear foods and these foods that have been considered, air quotes, bad, to neutralize them, to make
Hmm.
them just food. So we can have Oreos in our cupboard and not feel this urge of, oh my gosh, I need to eat the entire package because I just want it out of my house and it's out of sight, out of mind. And then after I finish it, I'm never going to eat it again. So it's very backwards from what a lot of people think, because a lot of people are told, don't bring the sugar into the house. You can't have it. But we know through research that restriction causes binging. It's the number one indicator of binging. And so the more we can expose our clients to those fearful foods in safe ways, the more calm they feel around food and the more they can start to make choices that are going to feel pleasant versus, again, those choices that are rooted out of fear and guilt and shame. I'm sorry, I just went 1,000 different ways, Lisa. So you take it however you want.
That's very interesting. And it makes a lot of sense what you're saying. And I think for a lot of people, it can be so helpful. But let's look at the other side. There are some people also who feel like I have this issue of trying to get pregnant or having a struggle with finding a donor or worried about my surrogate being pregnant or what have you. And what they really want is a sense of control in their lives that they don't have. And sometimes they might feel like, well, if I could, whatever it is, eliminate sugar or get rid of the plastics in my house or, get to a healthy BMI, then I feel like at least there's something that I'm doing. So what would you say to those people?
I'm so glad you brought that up. And so I definitely only went one way in my last example, right? Where I was saying how food can be a coping mechanism and we can turn to it for comfort and sometimes feel out of control or get lost in it. And then there's definitely is that other group, almost like the opposite, where that restriction gives us that false sense of control because we can't control our fertility journey, right? There's only so much we can do. And so it's like, well, okay, if I can't control that, then if I count my calories or eliminate this or, whatever it is, just like you said, it's going to give me that false sense of control. And to them, I would say, I know how hard this is, but this is maybe one of the first times. I know for me, it was the first time in my life that I wanted something so badly. And no matter what I did, I could not control the outcome. I could do my shots on time. I could take my medications. I could go to acupuncture. I could do, everything and anything. But still, no matter what, at the end of the day, my body was going to do what my body was going to do. And I could not control that embryo count at the end of the day when it was all said and done. So to those clients, I would say, get curious of how does it feel? Let's say I'm going to use an example. If you're counting calories, staying under a certain calorie amount to try to feel that control. Well, how does it feel when we go over those calories, right? Or if you're trying to stay away from a certain amount of food and for whatever reason, you eat that food that you've been restricting, how does that feel? Do we feel guilt and shame? Do we feel out of control in that sense of, oh my gosh, I'm such a bad person. How could I do this? This is going to derail my entire fertility journey. Recognizing and getting curious of that morality that is tied to those behavior patterns is so important. And practicing the radical acceptance of the season that you are in. That was the hardest thing for me of knowing, again, back to this releasing control and understanding that we have to accept this season. And there are things that we can work on with our behaviors that will make us feel pleasant. Like we said, sleep hygiene, stress management, but things that are going to instill guilt and shame with us, I would not recommend for clients. So it's being aware of some of those behaviors and how they make us feel.
And what about the people who really need this kind of management? So let's say someone has PCOS, or let's say their BMI is kind of at a dangerous level for them to get pregnant, or there's some other reason why they need to not necessarily calorie count, but maybe modify their eating.
Yeah, it's a great question. So a couple different things here. So with intuitive eating, we do not use weight or BMI as a metric in our practice. it is something that we can definitely talk about with clients, but we teach clients how to listen to their bodies using rational thought, instinct, and emotion through 10 defined principles in our intuitive eating practice. So as soon as we turn external to a calorie count, a weight on a scale, a macro count, it takes away that intuition and it places emphasis on trusting something outside of our body. So when we're working with clients, we do not use those metrics of things that we need to hit. Now, with that being said, in the fertility community, unfortunately, there are times that we've had clients that their clinic might not allow treatment under a certain BMI or, over a certain BMI and things of those nature. In that regard, we do try to get our clients with providers that will provide them support regardless of BMI and more of a health at every size or weight inclusive provider. But if that is not applicable to our client, we are still going to go through the intuitive eating principles with them and work through removing that guilt and shame with them and looking at, okay, what are some things we can do from a nutrition perspective that are going to have beneficial health outcomes, like increasing fruit and veggies. It might be increasing caloric intake to make sure we're eating enough. When we look at clients that we've worked with, they've been restricting themselves for so long that their bodies are actually not getting enough of the nutrients that we need to conceive. So a lot of times we're making sure that we're getting enough, again, increasing nutrients, hydration. We're really looking at sleep, stress management, more of these things that are going to have massive impacts. Because when we look at through the World Health Organization research, nutrition and movement have a 9% impact on our overall health. Now, don't get me wrong, 9% is 9%. That's still a good amount, but there are still many, many more things than that 9% that we can look at that are going to be impactful. And that goes back to, like I said, some of those individual behaviors that we talked about. To go full circle with you, I do want to also recommend an account that I can share with you called Fat Positive Fertility. I don't know if you've ever heard of Nicola Salmon or any of her work, but she is an incredible provider that supports those who reside in larger bodies who are looking to get fertility support. And she talks about the guilt and shame that is commonly instilled in these clients and how their bodies are often blamed for their infertility. And I saw it a lot in my fertility clinic as well when I was going through it. And as someone who has thin privilege, no doctor ever looked at me and said, your body is the reason you're not falling pregnant. But unfortunately, that happens a lot. And I just like to make it really clear to anybody listening, if body size was the cause of infertility, then every person that resided in a larger body would not be falling pregnant. And every single person in a smaller body or a thin body would fall pregnant naturally. And so I think it's really important, again, for listeners to hear their body is not to blame. They do not need to take on that guilt and shame. And again, back to what can we do from a health promoting behavior standpoint that is going to impact physical, mental, and emotional health without hyper focusing on shrinking the body. And again, I know it can be every clinic is so different with their requirements, with the ORs of numbers and things like that. But at least with the clients we're supporting, that is the work that we do.
And what about if we kind of think about that and we're looking at somebody who, let's say, needs to, for whatever health reason, maybe they need to lose some weight because it's a straining on their heart or there's some issue. The doctor's saying if you get pregnant at this point, it may be difficult for your health, or even for the PCOS patients who have an issue that requires them to change their diet, right? So what about people who kind of medically need some adjustment in their diet?
So the way that we work with clients is back to this idea of weight is not a behavior, it's a data point. So similarly to we were talking about pregnancy, I can use myself as an example. I have 3 autoimmune conditions. I happen to reside in a smaller body. So a doctor will never look at me and say, you need to lose weight and your autoimmune conditions will get better because I live in a straight size body. I have many patients that have the exact same conditions as me. They'll go to the doctor and the doctor says, if you lose weight, this condition will get better. But we know that that's not the truth. Weight is not a behavior, it's a data point. So if we are, let's say, working with someone with PCOS, we're going to be looking at their nutrient profile. First, we're going to look at the guilt and shame if they have any with food. Some of those patterns we were talking about earlier about like restricting and binging and things of that nature. Then we're going to look at, again, if they want to, not because they have to, nobody owes us this kind of work. But if we have a client come to us and say, I really want to improve, some of my nutrition, then we're going to look at their entire profile of nutrients and say, okay, are we balancing our meals? Are we eating frequently enough? Oftentimes we find people are going a really, really long time without eating, trying to air quotes, be good. And then that causes that overconsumption or that feeling out of control or that feeling of unpleasantness. So we're getting our clients to eat more frequently. We're looking at their nutrients across the board and say, are we getting a nice variety of protein, carbohydrates, fat, as well as color, including different, vitamins and minerals, supplementation if needed, but we're definitely more food first kind of people. And then again, hydration. Hydration is one of those big hitters that I feel like it's so boring to people where they're like, I know I need to drink more water, but water is found in every single cell in the body. It is important for digestion, absorption of nutrients. So this doesn't mean that people need to go from drinking 30 ounces to 128 ounces overnight. But if we can get just a little bit more, so we're working on these little baby steps of, okay, well, can you have a water bottle that has a straw attached to it on your desk? So while you're on meetings and working or driving, we're able to get those little sips in. That's going to go a long way. So we are working on, again, these individual behaviors. We do not focus on intentional weight loss with our clients, and we're still seeing those dramatic health outcomes. So again, for patients, let's say with diabetes, we'll see A1Cs go from 9.1 to 6.0, and we're not working on intentional weight loss. We're working on how are we managing our blood sugars, right? How are we pairing our macronutrients? Are we eating often enough? And as we do that, that's where we're going to see those changes in some of the data points. And again, that doesn't mean a person's body won't change, but if we place the emphasis on shrinking the body, this goes back to that guilt and shame spiral that we were talking about, that a lot of our clients have faced their entire lives, where their bodies were blamed for their medical conditions, where again, we know that body size does not determine our soul health and all that encompasses our health.
Imagine your beautiful future. You're snuggling with your child. You feel so connected to them. Your friends and family are so happy, and you have everything that you've ever wanted. I want this for you too, but I want more than that. I want you to feel secure knowing that you've made the best decisions, not just short-term, but long-term for your future family. Wherever you are on your journey, whether you're choosing a donor, choosing a clinic, learning how to talk to your donor-conceived child about their origins, all of these decisions will have wider implications for your future. And I want you to have the right resources so you can feel empowered and confident at this very important time in your life. That's why I'm so excited to introduce you to Building Your Family. It's the only expert-guided platform designed for parents and parents-to-be using reproductive medicine. We provide unique strategies that you won't find anywhere else to make your path to parenthood smoother and more informed. And that's why our approach is about offering practical and actionable steps that you can use right now. Whether you're just starting out or already deep into your process, Building Your Family is here to guide you with expert advice, specialized education, stress reduction strategies, and a community to support you every step of the way. We can't wait to see you inside. And what about when people are going through treatment, right? When they're starting to cycle, very often, they have fluctuations in their hormones. They might get more moody. And sometimes that's when people might binge more or, indulge in other sorts of eating habits that maybe they didn't indulge in before. So how do you kind of manage that? Or do you just educate the patients first? How do you manage that with your clients?
It's a great question. And I actually just had a patient I'm thinking of that we talked the other day where she was blown away. She had gone through cycles before and had similar experiences where she felt out of control with some of the influx of hormones and things like that. And then we had worked together and then was going through a cycle and of IVF and was blown away that this time she wasn't feeling those same urges. And we started to talk about it and kind of get to the root of why. And I said, well, are you allowing yourself to eat the food? And she's like, what do you mean? Of course, I'm eating it, like hand to mouth, chew, swallow, eat it. I was like, yes, you're physically allowing yourself to eat the food, which you did last time. But last time when you ate the food, there was also the voice in your head that's saying, I shouldn't be eating this. I'm such a bad person for eating this. I'm so disgusting. Come tomorrow, I'm not going to do this again. If I don't get pregnant, it's all my fault because of what I'm eating. There was this narrative and this terrible voice in the head, food voice, that we call it the food police that existed. So the work that we did leading into her cycle, whether she was doing IVF or not, she had this very peaceful relationship with food going in where she knew she was allowed to have, the ice cream or the chocolate or whatever the things were, where she would have it if she wanted it, but it wasn't this urgency or this out of control feeling. And so I find that a lot of our clients, as they work through untangling this relationship with food, that is that feeling of cravings, because before they weren't allowed. I think of it as a bow and arrow where you're like, no carbs, no carbs, no carbs, no carbs. And you hit a breaking point where you say, screw that, give me all the carbs. And you let go. And that arrow flies so much further in the opposite direction than if you just allowed yourself to eat. And every human being listening to this, regardless of the size of their body, deserves to eat food without guilt or shame. And so I find that, again, back to what I feel like I might sound like a broken record, but it's the relationship with food that we need to look at first. And then, of course, knowing like, hey, if I'm finding that I'm looking for these foods more during treatment, that's okay. But I'm allowed to have these and I'm not a bad person for eating these.
So you feel like if people are looking at their internal dialogue and really thinking about how that affects them, then they're going to be able to, it's kind of working from the inside out, be able to manage their life in a healthier way more naturally.
100%. And you know this better than anyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
How our thoughts and our feelings impact our behaviors. And it might not yield the quick fix we're all looking for. But as we start to really become self-compassionate and build self-respect towards our relationship with food and body, then we start to care for ourselves in a way that feels physically, mentally, and emotionally pleasant. But I always say to my clients, you cannot hate your way to happiness. So sometimes it's easier to think about it if we pull ourselves out of the equation and think of it as a loved one. So for listeners, like I want them to think of a loved one. It could be a friend, it could be a daughter, whoever. And if every single day you saw this friend and this loved one and you said, you know what? I would really love you more if you were 10 pounds lighter. I would really, really like you if you didn't eat sugar. Whatever. You could enter any kind of narrative in there. Do you think they would feel loved and respected by you? Probably not. And then if just one day you randomly changed your narrative and said, you know what? Just kidding. I love you just the way you are. Would they believe you? No. And so it takes time to see, okay, where did these belief systems come from? Where did I hear these messages? Was it family? Oftentimes, our mother and father's relationship with food has the biggest impact on our relationship with food. A lot of us grew up with parents that grew up in some of the strongest diet culture times. So, and then we think of media. I'm an elder millennial, so I grew up in the Cosmopolitan magazine time where I learned about Jennifer Aniston's abs and how to look a certain way. And so we see this narrative in our head, and it takes time to unlearn it. And it takes time to be compassionate with ourselves and really connect with ourselves and figure out what we need. But I find that if we're just following meal plans and following checklists, we're not actually learning anything. We're just trying to follow rules until we can't do it anymore and then feel the guilt and shame spiral and so on and so forth, enter new diet.
So here's a question for you then, Sam, because what you're talking about is really emotional eating in a lot of ways, right? And how we deal with food and our emotions. But let's say we're somebody who doesn't really have disordered eating in that way or as much. Maybe everybody has a little bit. And somebody comes to you and says, look, I really want to get as healthy as I can, eat as well as I can, prepare myself for a pregnancy, and have the most nutritious lifestyle I can find. And that's really what's driving me to come and see this, this specialist. And I'd like to do it in a way that's kind of comfortable and slow and is not going to be, too rigorous. And so in that way, how would you advise people to kind of look at a priority list of how they could start to think about, okay, well, yes, maybe I'm not going to cut out all deli meats, or I'm never going to eat a potato chip again. But maybe there's certain things that I should think about first. And if that's comfortable for me, are there other things I can think about? If you had to kind of create some sort of priority list for people, how would you, I know this is a tough question, but how would you start to think about that?
Love that. So back to the disordered eating, I always love to share, especially because thinking of the trying to conceive seasons of life. So 65% of women ages 25 to 45 present disordered eating. An additional 10% have eating disorder. And that doesn't account for all of those who never seek treatment. So about 75% of women are disordered in some fashion. It's actually more common than not. So definitely we scan for that first. I will say it is very, very rare with our practice to see someone that doesn't have any type of disordered eating, but it's never been done. So if someone comes to us and they have a great relationship with food, they don't feel guilt and shame with food, exactly what you were saying, we're going to look at kind of the cornerstones of nutrition. So first off, talked a lot about this before, but hydration. Hydration is one that is vastly overlooked and it is so important. So important. So we're going to start with hydration. Then we're going to look at, are you getting enough energy throughout the day? I find that because a lot of people do come from a narrative of being good. And again, that's my disordered eating mentality coming in with education. But we want to make sure that we're fueling the body throughout the day. So we really like to balance those nutrients. We like to get, for example, if I'm just using an example of breakfast, can we find a way that we can get carbohydrates, protein, fat, fiber, and color? So is that an oatmeal bowl with nut butter and chia seeds and fruit or flax seeds in there? So can we get some kind of mixture there? Can we do a sourdough toast with eggs and avocados, maybe sprinkled pistachios or walnuts or almonds on there? So again, trying to get as much nutrient density as possible.
Sounds very good.
I know, I'm getting hungry. It's that lunchtime. Yeah. So really, to go back to your question, we're looking at inclusion with these clients, never deprivation. So if we work with clients, it's never about what can we get rid of. It's how do we add to enhance your nutrition, to enhance your lifestyle, and to bring you joy. Because again, if we don't enjoy it, it's never going to last, right? And so I never want someone choking something down just because they think this is going to be, again, that magic thing that works. So it's how do we bring enjoyment to our food too? And again, that's where every client is so different. So we're very, very fortunate that our practice, we do accept health insurance, and it allows us to work one-on-one with clients so we can have these conversations of, okay, what are your preferences? What are your food allergies? What is your budget? What is your access to food? What stores do you shop at? What is your lifestyle like, your work life, your home life? Because again, I think we live in this world, especially with AI and technology, that everyone just wants this like meal plan of here, do this, but that will not work for everyone, right? There's so many things that impact the choices that we make every day and the behaviors we have. So we feel so fortunate that we get to work with clients one-on-one and individually craft what's going to work for them in ways where we can really, again, include, enhance, and add in nutrient density, calories, which is just energy, and hydration, which are really the cornerstones to energy, which the body needs to be able to conceive.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And we were just speaking last week with an exercise expert and also reproductive endocrinologist who talked about that exactly. And I think it's such a good point for everybody to take home that if you're exercising or whatever you're doing, you need to make sure the calories keep coming in and the right type of calories if you can and
Mhm.
if you like them. And that's so important for people to remember because so many things can go wrong if we're undernourished, right? And not taking care of our bodies in that way. And the other point that you made, which I think people don't appreciate very often, is that it's so true that everyone's different. And people have preferences with texture, with taste, with sweet, all sorts of
Totally.
things, right? And we have to honor that because just because we don't like spinach doesn't mean we have to force ourselves to eat it, right? So it's those are really great points, really great points. Thank you for that.
Of course. And then we think about, what season is it? What state do you live in? What's the weather like?
Hmm.
What's in season? What's available? I mean, there are so many things that impact our food choices, but it can be fun. And that is something that as we continue to work with clients too, like a big part, I tell my daughter I have two daughters, but my 3.5-year-old, when you ask her, what does mommy do for work? She said she makes food fun for people. That's what she thinks I do. And
Oh.
that's what I tell her. And it's the truth because we live in a world with so many messages. So even if you're not actively dieting, we hear these messages that are just so negative around food and like
Hmm.
deprivation and all this. So can we bring fun to it? Can it be fun? And that's a lot of what we do too with working with clients. And as you know, going through fertility treatments, it can be so stressful. And so any way that you can kind of get out of your reality for a little bit and bring joy to something, that can be really great. And so that's a huge part of what we do too is bring satisfaction and pleasure and joy back to food.
I think that's wonderful, particularly because there are some people who don't have a lot of choices, right? If you're a PCOS patient and you really need to kind of think about that and you're thinking about your fertility, there's so many things that are dragging your mood down. To be able to make food more fun and to be able to kind of look at things that you can do to adjust your intake that could be pleasurable is, such a relief, I would imagine.
Yeah, and it's fun to be that safe place. Again, like people going through fertility treatments, you're meeting with all kinds of specialists, and it's so stressful. So to be able to just be there to hold space for the patient or the client, and say, "How can we help you?" and what are you looking for, and be that sounding board for them to nourish them not only physically but emotionally is an honor.
I agree 100% with you, Sam. Before we wind down, is there anything we didn't cover that you think would be important for the audience to know?
I think I just really want to drill home for people that your body is enough exactly how it is. There is nothing wrong with you. I think that was a lie that I believed for so long, whether it be in diet culture, whether it be with fertility. There is nothing wrong with you. And the more that you can build self compassion and self respect and treat yourself with the respect and compassion that you so easily give to others, the more happiness you're going to experience, the more joy you'll experience. And the more things really start to turn in a positive way. And so I think for anyone listening, if they don't remember anything we talked about, because we talked about a lot, I want them to know that there is nothing wrong with them and they are perfectly made. And we are here to just help support them along the way.
It's wonderful. I love that. That's great. So, how can people reach you, Sam? Can you share your information? I know you're very active on social media. So, perhaps you can share that, maybe your website with us.
Yeah, of course. So the easiest way would be probably Instagram. Our account is find.food.freedom. So find food freedom with periods in between, and just find food freedom on TikTok. And on both of those social media pages, you'll see the link right on there that you can get your insurance benefits checked. So if anyone is listening to this, we're licensed in over 25 states. We have over 13 registered dietitians that specialize in everything from PCOS, diabetes, disordered eating, eating disorder, fertility, motherhood, and postpartum, which is a whole, once you overcome that fertility, it's like a whole nother thing. So we have incredible dietitians throughout all walks of life. We have dietitians that reside in larger bodies too. So they not only have the professional experience, but the lived experience of what it's like to be in a larger body. And so we have a lot of clients that really like knowing they can work with a provider that understands that. So again, those links are on our social pages, and you just put in what state you live in, your insurance provider, and we get that back to you. And if we accept your insurance, a lot of people have unlimited sessions with dietitians virtually, and they have no idea. So I highly recommend just getting those benefits checked. And if you do not have coverage for any reason, we do gift everyone in our community a free month of support with 3 live calls. I just never want finances to be the reason that someone can't get the support that they're looking for. So either you have free sessions one-on-one or free sessions for a month. Either way.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, I hope everybody out there is listening to this and going to take advantage of Sam's beautiful offer, because this is so important. As you heard, not only is the food important to appreciate, but your body and mind are so important to appreciate. So thank you so much for coming, and please press subscribe. We find that there's so many people who listen to our podcast and they're not subscribers. So that's one thing that you can do for us. And we promise you that we will do our best to give you the best content and help you have a better path to parenthood. So thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for joining me today. I hope this was helpful to you. And if you'd like more personalized support, more information, and more education, you can find it in the show notes under the Building Your Family community. We'd love to see you inside. And if you were interested in today's topic, you will really like this video.